And to decide to run for Congress when I'm just gonna say it like this, like when your shit is fucked up. Like but yeah, when everything is so contentious, um, just is baffling because, what would have worked better would have been if Chris had engaged in this accountability process. We could have figured out, um, every like what had happened with the IWW. Like they could have gotten some closure because, and I think that that's not really part of the conversation, and it should be, which is how hurt people in the Boston IWW were.
Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is November 11, 2020. And this video is a follow-up video to another one that I put on the channel about 2 months ago in early September about an individual named Christopher Helali, who just ran for Congress in Vermont on the Party of Communists USA ticket. The run was fairly high profile, with Chris getting media coverage first from the usual suspects in the socialist Marxist underground on YouTube, channels with like 50,000 and fewer subscriptions, as well as later, much more prominent social democratic channels like Ron Placone, Nomiki Konst, Katie Halper, as well as mainstream media like local Vermont coverage, anything TV, newspapers, magazines, that kind of thing. My video was questioning PCUSA's wisdom in running Chris as a congressional candidate. I mean, it's high office, and, this necessarily would bring some scrutiny. It was brought to my attention that Chris has a publicly searchable past in particularly the Boston area with different activist groups, most notably the Boston branch of the IWW labor union, and that past has some controversies and some things that, I don't know, it just seemed to me like if you're going to run somebody for Congress, in my opinion, couldn't you have just found somebody without that kind of controversy and a record of other organizations saying that Chris had dodged an accountability process and that they were recommending specifically, as the Boston IWW put out a statement to this effect in 2019, that other organizations shouldn't work with him until he makes things right back in Boston. And by making things right, this includes both personal situations between Chris and activists he worked with and knew personally, as well as a situation back from 2015 into 2016 when Chris was part of a small faction of like 4 to 6 people in the Boston IWW who broke away from the main branch. Chris happened to be the branch secretary treasurer and drained the bank account. This was a large branch of the IWW, one of the larger ones in the United States. And the bank account contained dues money from, maybe 100 different members of this labor union. The majority of the money, Chris wrote a check for himself, which apparently was approved by this small clique of 4 or 5 people. Wrote himself a check for $3,500, which was to be used, as Chris describes, for, quote, revolutionary purposes. He wanted to go to Rojava and engage in armed conflict in Syria. So the IWW is fundamentally a labor union, one that emphasizes worker control, horizontal decision-making, and direct democracy, union democracy in their union. So the idea of a large branch of the IWW that regularly can turn out dozens of people to book fairs and tabling and other things, just having its bank account drained by 4 or 5 people who decided that they were going to take over the branch, that would be anathema really to any group with a sense of basic fairness, let alone one committed to radical democracy. And in the course of my research after that video, I did speak with several people who gave impact statements on what it did to the branch. It set them back years. It was destructive to trust. It was destructive financially. Chris eventually did pay the money back after the IWW's insurance company started hounding him for it. And in fact, today, since that video of mine came out, Chris has done another interview on another YouTube channel in which he gives his side of the story and apparently the definitive account, because every time that I have raised these concerns about PCUSA and Chris, I keep getting referred by channel hosts of different socialist YouTube channels. It's been handled is like the most common thing. And go check out this interview because he addresses it there. So that seems to be the official statement by Chris. Now, I'm going to do a video addressing that and also addressing the Boston IWW impact statements. But before I do that video, I think it's important to spotlight somebody who reached out to me after I put my first video about the Boston IWW and the money in that situation. Somebody reached out to me who said that she was the mother of Chris's child, that Chris had gotten her pregnant in 2016 and has since really failed to support her or the baby. And Chris actually also addressed this in his most recent interview in which, he's, air quotes, putting the controversies to rest. I spoke with this woman, Zipporah Legarde, who is a Boston area activist, as she will tell you. And the sense that I got from this conversation was that before I went back in to sort of do battle with the internet comments and everything else, really something that just interests me less and less with each passing day on this issue, or most issues actually. Really what I needed to do was just give her some airtime, because listening to her account of what happened with Chris, his handling of the responsibilities that she presented to him, just really cast this entire story in a different light. So while I do expect to have another video coming up in which I address the impact statements from Boston IWW members from 2016, 2017, who talked about the fallout in that organization and the way that all of these experiences impacted their work, I feel like Zipporah's impact statement is unique, really changed my perspective on how I'm looking at the situation, and should be heard. My last comment that I want to make before getting into the interview is that in his response statement, denial, denunciation, etc., Chris Helali tried to paint his critics on this subject as being ideologically motivated, specifically that they were mad because the IWW has a slightly different ideological orientation than his current group, PCUSA, and that they were those activists who felt and have been saying that they were harmed by his and others' actions were doing so because they were mad that he joined PCUSA and left their scene, and I guess by implication they just miss him so much, and that's why they're making these claims. For anyone who is very online, has never worked in an organization, and doesn't maybe understand the impact of being in an org that blows up, it's huge. And for anyone who is super invested in the tankies versus anarchists or Maoists versus Dengists or whatever other stupid online fight you're having right now, I'd like you to leave it at the door. And remember, we're talking about real people, real world, real organizations. Without further ado, this is my first interview with Zipporah Legarde in early November of 2020 and her accounts of knowing Chris Helali. You obviously became personally familiar with Chris Helali in the last few years. Tell us about yourself and what you were doing and how you came to know Chris Helali.
Yeah. So I moved to Boston in September of 2015. I'm originally from New Orleans area. I did a lot of organizing there around prison abolition. And I came to Boston to do an AmeriCorps service year where I worked for an after school program. So I met Chris actually online on a dating website I'm going to say it was like March 2016. Um, I, at the time, was actually in New Orleans. I had a job. I worked for a youth services nonprofit, and I got terminated from that job on a basis that fit the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act. So I I was going through the process with the NLRB to hopefully get back pay and like the reinstatement of my job because I was doing union organizing activities, try to get us all paid. Um, so and I was dating. So Chris and I met. We had like a really high, match percentage, and um, so like we chatted a little bit. I was talking a little bit about like, he was like, oh, I'm in a union, or like that's what I do for like leftist organizing. I was like, oh, I'm going through this thing. And so, like we pretty immediately connected. We also connected primarily because we were both, he identified at that time as a person of color. So I was like, I too am a person of color who's organizing in this very white dominated space. Coming from New Orleans to Boston was a big culture shock for me organizing wise, because in New Orleans, um, Black people really lead all of the like significant leftist, organizing that happens there. So yeah, we chatted, but in all honesty, I was really just kind of chatting with a lot of different people, and he really wanted to meet up like immediately, and I just like wasn't super interested just because I was really struggling again with the culture shock of being in New England. It's also like really cold here, and I wasn't really vibing with um, my AmeriCorps placement. I was just like really, I was really radical, and so I like was really struggling with the administration. So I just kind of blew him off. I ghosted him. That's what that's called. I ghosted him. And then in May, I posted, there's a local group, it's called Queer Exchange Boston. I needed some help with a computer networking problem. So I posted in the group to try to see if I could find someone who would like be willing to help with that problem, like in the community. And he actually messaged me on Facebook and was like, hey, like we were talking on OkCupid and like I thought we were going to meet up. And so I was like, oh, this like I'm just trying to get computer networking help. I'm not really trying to like meet people here. Um, and like, but I was like, okay, like I kind of was talking with this guy and I did ghost him. So we chatted and like made plans to meet up. Um, I went to a party with him. Um, it was a party at his house with that he shared actually with some of the folks who people would know as being part of the faction split or whatever you want to call that with the IWW. Um, and yeah, we hung out, and I don't think it's super important for me to get into specifics of that, but we did end up beginning a like strictly like sexual relationship, um, and yeah, that went on for about 2 weeks. And then he left for Greece. Um, and shortly after he left for Greece, I found out that I was pregnant. Um, so I I had originally blocked him like on all of my platforms um, because I didn't understand why I was pregnant. Um, and then I felt like that was wrong to have done that, like he as this potential person's other parent deserved to be involved in whatever decision I made. So I unblocked him and, I told him, and we started making plans for what to do about that situation.
And so this is in 2016.
Yeah, it was 2016 by that time. May, June 2016.
Okay. So what happened next?
So yeah,
And sorry, I just wanted to add. So he had been married and was getting divorced at this time.
yeah. So I didn't know that. He I can remember there was definitely a day in that, 2 weeks that, we were together. Um, I went to his place to meet up with him. And when I got there early, and one of his roommates let me in. So I was just kind of like hanging out in his room. And then he came in and he had this manila folder and he was like, it's done. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's cryptic, but, and, like I was like, it's weird. And then I was just like, yeah, okay, what? Like, what happened? And he was just all like, my divorce is finalized today. And I was just like, oh, you're married. And he was just like, well, I'm not anymore. And so this is like, I didn't like that. The reason I didn't like it is I'm like I'm really old school. I'll call it old school. But like I was raised in a really traditional Southern background, and as a person, my parents are divorced, and I just like don't believe that you should be like until it's finalized on paper. That like I grew up in the church, so like until it's finalized on paper, like you're still married. And he didn't tell me that. So I, freaked out a little bit. I like to believe that I was not so mean about it, but I definitely was like, I don't like this. I think that you should have told me. And his position was just that, like, it didn't matter that he hadn't told me because it was over. And for me, it felt like I'm just going to be honest, like that I had engaged, I had like enabled someone to be sinful. So I was really against it. And he really leaned into the fact that both of us were religious.
I mean,
To
he went to divinity school. Was that before or after this?
That was why it was really a big shock. Because I kind of couldn't believe that I had to explain to someone who was similarly religious that this was not okay. And he presented it like it was his first time ever hearing from someone that it was a problem. Um, and so yeah, we had a conversation about it. But the majority of the conversation was him being like, I'm just so glad that like we both, have this religious background because, a lot of leftists, a lot of anarchists are not religious, and they make fun of people like you and me, and so it's really important for us to get to know each other and continue this relationship because like clearly like God has brought you to me so that like we can do this work together. And
Pretty heavy.
yeah, yeah. So I just I forgave it pretty immediately. um
Okay. And so these 2 weeks that you're talking about, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but these 2 weeks that we're talking about, um, your child resulted from those 2 weeks? Because I think a lot of people out there are under the misconception that, like, I mean, he had another wife who he was divorcing basically at the time he started seeing you. But I
yeah.
think a lot of people are under the impression that you guys were like married or you're his like ex, but really this sounds more like almost I mean, a very brief thing.
Yeah, his ex-wife is not me. I've seen that online. Like, I've seen me referred to as his ex-wife, which is gross for a lot of different reasons, but it's just, yeah, not I'm not her. Um, his ex-wife was someone that he went to college with, I believe. I don't really know much about her. She was not like part of our scene in any way. Like, so yeah, but
So
I'm
you never met her.
sorry, what did you say?
I said you never met her.
No, I've never met her. Very few people knew that he was married. Like, some of the people he was close to in the like faction split, a woman that I lived with who identified him as like her best friend, she knew. But pretty much no one else knew that, you know, he had been married. I think because he entered the scene just kind of suddenly and, um, you know, like, but even then, I don't know. I find that really weird because I was pretty surprised. And when I told other people, they were like, "Oh, what? Really? Like, he never mentioned that to us." So I get why people think because of that overlap. And I hate that overlap because it's actually super uncomfortable for me. But no, yeah, he and I had, you know, if you want to call it a relationship, um, for 2 weeks, like mid May to, I think he flew out on June 1st. And he did briefly stay at my house for like 2, 3 days because, you know, he was moving. So he had sublet to someone. And so because he was subletting, he didn't have a place to stay. And like pretty early in the situation, I was like, yeah, you can just crash at mine. Like, cause I lived at a place that was like massive. It just had a lot of room. So I was like, yeah, you can just like come chill. I like invite people to like stay here all the time. Um, and so, yeah, like super, super brief.
Okay. So, and then, I mean, so there was the 2 weeks he left. Um, what happens at that point?
So after he left, honestly, so like I had a, I had an interaction with him that was really like concerning. Um, it's like silly. Well, it's not silly, but I it's like a small one. He he was like still wrapping things up with like his divinity program, and he wanted me to burn a CD, like a DVD. And I'm like, you know, I made that post trying to get someone to help me with like a networking issue, but I like work with computers and I'm normally pretty good at it. So I was like, oh yeah, like I can copy that DVD for you. It was like from a professor. So he brought it to me. And I was so like anyone who's done AmeriCorps, you know, like I was so full up with work and just a general like bullshit of that job. And so I just like didn't do it on the timeline that I had committed to. And so he came over and he was like, "Oh, do you have, you know, that thing that like DVD burned for me?" And I was like, "Oh, you know, like I'm so sorry. I didn't do it yet. Like I had a really busy day, you know, blah 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 as you do." And like he was sitting on my couch and he just like the way I describe it is a light switch. Like he just went from like this very like affable, friendly person that I know him as, and I think a lot of people have seen, to just like dark. Um, and he just was like looking at his hands. He's like sitting, looking at his hands, and he's just like, you know, you said that you would have this done. And I was like, yeah, you know, like, and I just kept talking and I kept like sorry, and he just was like, no, like, you know, you like made a commitment to like doing this thing for me. And
When you say you're gonna burn a DVD.
yeah, like, so you're gonna burn DVD and you like it was as if I had committed the like greatest crime in all of the land. So he left and like I immediately figured out how to burn that DVD. Like looking back, I very clearly was like I was scared. Like I was scared of him. I barely knew him. he was like at my house, like in my room, like, and I had disappointed him. And I didn't like that I had disappointed him. You know, like I was trying to like be like a good friend who sometimes had sex with him. And like um but yeah, like that was my like first indicator. I was like, something is weird with this guy, and like, maybe you should just not like continue to engage with him. But honestly, I just like something like something about him is really magnetic. And I was like, well, I read that situation in a way that makes this person seem really terrifying, but there's no possible way that that could be true because no one else thinks that this person is weird. And all of his friends are really cool, like rad anarchist types. And like, you know, he's like in charge of our local IWW. I didn't know at that time. I didn't know anything about like what was happening there. Like that
And
was
that had, for the audience, that had just happened. I mean, the confrontation between his small 4 or 5 people faction and the rest of the branch had happened in like January or February, so just a few months before.
yeah, and like that just wasn't that was they didn't talk about it like that. Like in fact, like I remember the way that they talked about the IWW, like them they were like, "Oh yeah, we're all in the same union org, the IWW." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with that. That is an organization that exists." And but they didn't like trash talk anybody. They weren't like more so it seemed like they were like celebratory. Like, yeah, we like are turning this organization around, and like isn't that so exciting to be part of like making this organization better? And that was what I thought was happening. And the way that it was presented to me was that like like that people within the org were misogynist or like racist or, whatever. And so I was just like, yeah, I too, and especially like Chris presented it as this like very like racialized dispute because he was a person of color. And I was just like, oh yeah, white leftists suck. I know that. Like, so it all was super believable to me, like, especially because it was him. There was a no, there was a black guy who was part of like the parties, and he was also in the IWW at the time. And then it was like these other white folks who were, I thought, doing their job as being allied to what he wanted. And so it just like I didn't know that it was so bad. I just like I didn't find out how awful it had been until um when all the stuff happened in December 2016, when I was like 7 months pregnant. It came up because he dodged an accountability process. So, do you
Within the IWW, or what was that accountability process?
yeah, so um, basically, December, I was 7 months pregnant, and he came back from Greece. And I met with him at like South Station. Like he got off the plane, came there. I met with his mom, and we took the train to his family home, which is in this little town like outside Worcester, Western Mass. And I thought that we were gonna have like it was Christmas. It was like Christmas time, and so I thought, like I was gonna meet the family. I was really excited. He had not told his family that I was pregnant or that I even existed.
And that was 7 months after he found out.
Yeah. So when he was in Greece, I was constantly like, I mean, I know I shouldn't use this word, but I was nagging him like to tell his parents because when I found out I was pregnant, I wanted to go home. Um,
Well, it's a life-changing event. You need support.
yeah, my family's really big. So, and my mom is very old school, in that, she always said, if you get pregnant, don't get an abortion, come home, we'll figure it out. And even though I'm an adult, I still, and yeah, like I'm a leftist. People assume certain things about my being a leftist, and like I am, pro-choice. And also for me personally, um, the idea of an abortion was just really, really not what I wanted. I'll just say it like that. It was really,
Well, that I mean, and that's what pro-choice means.
yeah. I mean, yeah, that's sort of the thing. It's been really kind of odd because it does come up. People were like, "Oh, you didn't get an abortion? You just get an abortion?" Like I knew that was an option that was available to me. I just didn't I didn't want to do it. And he also was really against me getting an abortion.
Chris was.
Yes, he was.
What did he say about that?
Um, he said that it would be against our religious values for me to get an abortion. Um, and he immediately started talking about the fetus as a baby. And I'll say it like he was like immediately really attached to me in a way that like I couldn't figure out. Like um I'm pregnant, like I don't know if I really want to be pregnant. I am. I'm kind of like, how did this even happen? And he's just like emailing me and like bombarding me with like, I love you, we've been brought together, this child is going to be, like a mix of like our, cultural identities, and a revolutionary, and isn't that so wonderful, and do you love me? And I was like, fuck. I was like, um I felt bad. I felt really bad. I felt like I had strung this person along, um and that this person clearly wanted more from me than I was really willing to give. So I was like really trying to like keep the wall there of like, okay, so like we've known each other for 2 weeks, and you are saying that you love me, and that is just not true. You don't know me at all. We don't know each other, but like we do have a responsibility to this, potential life, to like at least learn enough about one another so that like we can co-parent in a way that's like healthy.
Mhm.
So I was always trying to like get them to go back on script. So anyway, yeah. So part of the deal of me staying in Massachusetts, because he was like, if you move to Louisiana, I'll never have the opportunity to, know my child, as if planes don't exist, but like whatever. Um, uh, I was like, okay, so, you need to connect me like with your family. Like we need to talk with them, because he was like, oh, my family, lives close, and like they'll be around to support. But um like he just refused to tell them, like, and it wasn't like he refused and like he said, I'm not telling them, like that I could have worked with, but he just kept delaying it. He was like, oh, right now is not a good time, or oh, I'm gonna tell him. Actually what ended up happening was, so when he was in Greece, he got arrested a few times, or he claimed, like, I don't really know if it actually happened, but he claimed that he was arrested multiple times. I'm guessing at least once that really did happen. um and so, well,
And so just to clarify, so he was in when he was in Greece and Syria, was this like a back and forth at the same time, or were these separate periods?
these were separate periods. So he was in
Okay.
Greece from June 2016 to December 2016. Um, and then he left for Rojava right after that. So like,
So, and I just want to point out to the audience also, I think a question here is the justification for writing himself a $3,500 check was to go to Rojava, which didn't happen then for another like 10 months.
yeah, the thing about that I also thought was really weird was, so he had that money, but he didn't tell me about it. And,
Which might be relevant if he's having a child.
yeah. And, at one point I sent an email where I was like, okay, I've decided I'm going to have an abortion. I really don't want to have one, but I'm going to do it because, like, you clearly have things that you're doing with your life, and I have things that I'm doing with my life. And like having a child right now, especially when I don't know you, is like, that's ridiculous. And we're being ridiculous. And like one of us has to be the pragmatic one. And so it's going to be me. And he, didn't, like, generally when a guy, I'm just going to say it like this, like in my experience of having known people who have had abortions, the other person usually like provides some sort of support. Like if they can't physically be there, they're like, okay, here's some money. Um, he didn't even offer to like pay for the abortion, even though, I mean, like, we're having a conversation around where he's like, oh, I like the money, the check that was written to Max was for their cancer treatment. And I'm just like, well, I would have liked to have known that we could have afforded an abortion if that was something that we were actually going to do. But, and even when I chose to keep our child, I needed help with like finding housing and things like that. And I was really transparent with him that like I didn't have money. And anytime we spoke about it, he was like, "Oh, I don't have money either." Like, ooh. And so I'm not saying that like, I mean, I guess, I'm not going to say it. I'm not saying, I am saying that like, I know that one of the big things is that people are kind of making it like, um, something that I was told actually was like, well, if you knew he wasn't going to be there, you could have made another decision. Um, but abortions aren't free. And I felt like he was like actively blocking me, from like seeking resources. Like at one point, um, I was trying to like I was trying to figure out housing. Um, I said to him, I was like, do you know any people who like live in cooperative houses who would maybe be cool with like me having a baby there, like until we like figure things out. At that time, he was trying to get me to move to Greece. But I was like, no, I think I should stay here. So like, could you connect me with housing? He was like, I don't know anyone like that. So I like went through the networks that I had, which were, pretty slim because I had only been here a few months. But I went through an activist that I knew, who put me in touch with a house. And then I applied to live at the cooperative house, only to discover that one of the members of the house was his super close friend who identified him as being her best friend. And so then I was like, I said to him, I was just like, yeah, I connected with, this person. She says she knows you. And he was just like, oh, yeah, she's super great, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of just wanted to like, slap this guy in the face. I was like, you didn't tell me like she lives in a cooperative house and, long story short, they accepted me and like I had my child there. Like, and he didn't even think, like this is someone to connect me with. But I mean, and I'm just going to say it, it's obvious. Like he didn't connect me with her because he wanted me to move to Greece because like that was, so he wasn't going to help me figure out an alternative thing, because he wanted me to keep the baby and he wanted me to move to Greece. That's just clear. That's obvious. So anyway, yeah, I think you were asking about. So yeah, while he was in Greece, um, I was telling him tell his parents. He didn't do that, so he got arrested and he was gone. Like I couldn't contact him in any way. So through his like close friend, he had I think like a WhatsApp account, but he wouldn't give it to me. He only gave me his Skype, and I could communicate with him via Facebook Messenger, and that was it.
Okay.
So he was gone. Like I couldn't get in touch with him. So I said to our, now mutual friend, I was like, "Hey, have you heard from Chris?" And she was just like, "Oh no, I spoke to this person in the squat, and he was arrested. And by that time, he had been arrested I, twice before. And the thing that he told me the second time he was arrested was that if actually that second time, the second time he got arrested we were talking on Skype and he told me this, and I was just like, okay, so I was like, it seems to me like the responsible decision for you to make is, and he was just like, there's nothing else I can do. I was like, you could not go on like night patrols to fight Golden Dawn. No one is making you do that. I'm, at that time I was like, 4 or 5 months pregnant. So I was just like, you have to come back in one piece so that we can co-parent, right? This is a commitment that you've made.
Yeah,
And
you're
you
keeping
are,
the baby now, etc.
yeah, like, and you're fighting neo-Nazis. And I want to note here, like when he went to Greece, he told me that he was going to be a translator for the squad because he speaks multiple languages. So he was just like, oh, I'm just going there to translate. Then when he got there, he's telling me, oh, I got arrested. Oh, I got in this fight. And I was like, why? Translators don't do, what are you doing? And he was just like, oh, well, everyone in the squad is expected to, do their share of patrols. So I have to do, these nightly patrols. Um, I'll just say later I figured out that that was not the case. Like you're not. I mean, come on, we're talking about anarchists, like, and not to like paint like broad strokes here, but like he told me that he had told them that he had a woman in America who was pregnant, and that they had basically told him you still have to do patrols, and later we found out that they didn't know that I existed or that he was having a child or anything at all. And I'm not saying that like they wouldn't have still told him that he had to do this thing, but the entire conceit that like he was being forced to in any way is just not true.
How
So
did you find that out?
um I found that out through talking with this person who was connected with the squat through the mutual friend that we had. And it also, like, I follow, like, when he was there and even since, like, I've followed, like, what's happening. And I think it's called Persifia. Like, I'm not, like, super great with languages. And yeah, it's very, like, like voluntary. But actually, and I'll say this, I actually caught him in this because, so I got ultrasound pictures and I wanted to show them to him. And, he had already told me like, oh yeah, I told them that like I'm having a baby, but they won't let me out of this, like mandatory like night patrol. And so I was like, I just don't think that this guy is telling me the truth. So I said to him in a call, I was like, oh, I was like, I really want to send you these pictures. I really want you to have, pictures that you can put up in your little space. Like he had his own little, like, I think like bed or cot or whatever, and he had taped up postcards. And our mutual friend from the cooperative house was sending him postcards. So what I said was, I'm going to turn one of these ultrasound pictures into a postcard and I'm going to send it to you so you can put it up in your little area. Like, since you're so excited about this baby we're having and all. And I was like, just, tell me what the address is so I can get this sent out to you. And he was like, oh, I don't have an address. There's no way that you can possibly send me a postcard. Even though I knew that our mutual friend had sent him postcards because I was looking at them. Like we're on Skype, I'm looking at postcards she sent. He's like, oh, I just don't think that it would get here to me for me to be able to put it up here. Oh, I'm so
Oh.
sorry about that. Yeah, yeah. So and
I mean, for me, that would certainly raise a few red flags as well.
yeah, I mean, I knew that they didn't know. I mean, like it just I the way that he spoke about the people just kind of, I don't know, it was like he didn't really know them well, and it didn't seem like he was like really trying to get to know them well. And he would say things like, oh, we just don't talk about like our personal lives, we only talk about the revolution, as if like they were just too serious,
I mean, is it the army? Like which
and that,
season?
that to me seemed like he was more pulling from, like his personal experience, like maybe in the army, because like I don't know, I don't believe that Greek anarchists are like that. Like I read the interviews with them and they're very like, I mean, they're humans,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
talk about things on a very human level. So when he was just like, "Oh, we don't talk about anything except the revolution," I was just like, I, the way that you're characterizing these people seems really strange to me.
Right. It sounds unusually dispassionate for anarchists.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree. Though I would be curious to meet them because maybe I just misunderstand something culturally, but I don't think that I do. So anyway, yeah, I feel like I didn't explain the thing that happened. So anyway, he didn't tell his parents about me. He was gone. He was arrested in jail somewhere for days. And so I was like, "Ooh, I think I need to like connect, like he might die in a Greek prison. He might be going, he said something at once that he was like potentially going to do like 18 months." And hit my response to that. I was like, "So you do realize," I was like, "the way math works is that in 4 months I'm going to have a baby and you will not be here because you are choosing to go on patrols and you will end up in Greek prison." And he just looked at me blankly as if like I had said that like 4 plus 4 was 15. Like he like acted as if the concept was so high, like that he couldn't get it. And I was just like, the way that math works is that I have to have the baby in a 9 month time frame. So you need to not be in jail. And he, got arrested again. And so I sent his parents a card. That was how it happened. It was Thanksgiving time ish. And I wrote them a card and I mailed it to them. And I was basically like, "Hello, we haven't met. You don't even know that I exist, but I'm having your grandchild, and I think Chris is in prison. And so I have to tell you this, and I'm really sorry that you have to get a card that's telling you this, but I don't really know what else to do. And I only have your address because they have a really uncommon last name. So I just looked it up and found their address."
Yeah.
Um,
So I was going to ask you, did Chris give you the address or did you look it up and you found it independently?
yeah. And at the same time, I found his brother on Facebook. I messaged him. And then I want to say, like, I wrote the card and I carried it around in like my backpack for like 3 days because I was like, sending a card is such a terrible way to tell someone that they're having, um, that like someone is coming into their life, like two
Mhm.
someone's, right? Because like my daughter and me. And I really didn't want to do it that way. But like I mean, I was like, yeah, 6 months pregnant. So like I was just like, someone has to tell these people what's going on. And yeah, so I like I think it was like my phone number I put in the card or whatever way. But anyway, his brother responded pretty favorably. He was like, "Oh wow, like Chris didn't tell us anything that you about you." I met up with him. He was really nice. I met up with his mom. She was really nice. Um, but I was upset. It was really a lot because I couldn't get in touch with him and I had to like make a decision. And it was just like the whole time I was just like, why didn't he tell them months ago? We could have had more opportunities. And that was the thing too, because they were so nice. I was just like, what was he so afraid of? Like these people are great. And like I could have been getting to know them all of these months while he was gone instead of, waiting for him. Because basically by that time he was like, I wanted to wait to tell them until Christmas. And I was just like, "Well, Christmas, I'm 7 months pregnant, and that's really late to tell people." I was also dealing with, my own family who I had not told myself. So it was like I had finally, like, told my own mom, and that was, like, a really tough thing because my family is very old school, so their first, question was, "Who's the father?" And I was just like, "Yeah, a guy I kinda know." which is not what you want to hear. As a parent, it's just not what you want to hear. And my parents,
Right. Well, it's a lot of uncertainty for sure.
yeah, like I moved all the way up to New England. I was doing the AmeriCorps program, but I hoped to do a master's program, and like, um, getting pregnant was not what I had planned for me, and it wasn't what my parents had planned for me either. So it was just really a shock. And I felt I was kind of upset because I had to do it twice. I had to do it for my own family, and then I had to do it for his family too. So anyway, yeah, he came back in December. I thought he was going to be back like permanently. Um, so I go to his family home. Once we get there, he's like, we need to, sit down, let's have a conversation. We had like taken the train for like an hour, and the whole time I was doing a birth plan. So, like who's going to be in the room? What sort of things do you want? I had a doula. So it's like, oh, like, let's talk about oils or whatever. And he just kept being like, let's wait to talk about that until we get home. There's been some developments. We need to wait until we get to, my house, and then we can talk more.
Hmm.
And I just had that feeling. Like,
Sure.
I just, I'm sitting with this guy and his mom, and even his mom, she went from being like really, like friendly and nice. She's like a really sweet lady. She was so awkward and quiet. And I knew he was going to tell me something that was like not good.
Change of plan.
Yeah, I stayed on that stupid train. I should have just gotten off. There are so many like instances in my interactions with him that I just should have said this is enough and just said I'm done. But I went with him, and when we got to his home, he took all of our phones, and he took the remotes like from the TVs, and he put them all like in another room. And then he like came and sat down at the table, and he had like the stack of letters, I remember, and he claimed that they were from like various government agencies that he had FOIA like requested on himself like months prior, and that they had, gotten back to him. And so he was like opening these letters and just going like, ha, like these people don't have anything on me. They don't know where I've been. Like, I'm so underground. And so I'm just sitting
Okay.
there, like trying to see, um, like just kind of waiting because I knew he was going to say something. So he sits down. It's like me, his mom, his dad's not home yet. He was like working really long hours. And Chris is just like, I have been, specially chosen to serve in this, like faction of the YPG. And like it's such an honor. And honestly, I tuned out then
Yep.
because
That wasn't what you were there to talk about for starters.
no, like I thought I was going to his house to like have a nice Christmas, like I thought I was going to meet his grandfather who he talked so highly of. And his
Yeah,
mom,
be taken into their family.
yeah, his mom had planned a baby shower with like some of her close friends for me. And he was telling me that he was leaving to go to Syria. And so I, you know, flipped out. I mean, I actually didn't yell. I was just like, okay, so I'm pregnant. And like, and I've been trying to make plans, and you have been, so slippery, like about like I tell you I want to figure out a birth plan, who's going to be in the room, and you say, let's wait to do that. I mean, the thing is like when he got me pregnant, he told me then, like, oh, I'm gonna go serve in a YPG. And I was like, okay, but like if you're gonna go do that, then an abortion, yeah. And it was like he was telling me that he didn't want me to have the abortion. And because he didn't want me to have the abortion, he was like, okay, I won't go serve in the YPG, right? That was the deal.
Okay.
And then I'm 7 months pregnant. He's like, oh, actually, I changed my mind. It's not like I can change my mind, right? Because I'm 7 months pregnant. So I was really upset because, like, he could have just been honest with me from the beginning. I would have moved home to Louisiana, or I maybe would have had the abortion. I don't know. But, like, if he had been more forthcoming about what his plans were, I could have worked with that. But instead, he put me in a really impossible situation. And, I was like, this isn't the deal. And he kept just like focusing on how so important it was for him to serve in a YPG. And I was just like, okay, but we already had this conversation, 6 months ago. We had this conversation. We came to a shared understanding. So why are you now making all the same points? Like, and so, I was just like, I don't support you in this. Like, I I disagree. Not because
Well, and along those lines, what were the reasons he was giving as far as like joining the YPG? Like what was he saying? I mean, obviously this is an unpaid capacity, I'm assuming, and
yeah.
like, well, why was that so?
So his
What
reasoning,
was going on with you two?
yeah, so he was like, I am Kurdish, and so it's important for me to serve in this, revolutionary project. And the thing that I think he thought would make it better for me to understand it was that, like, he was going to be a leader, like it isn't that he was just going to be some nobody, but like that he had been specially appointed to be, this person for the, now we all know as the IRPGF. Um,
And
and
do you know how he was chosen for that?
I know nothing about that.
Okay.
I really don't. Um, and that didn't change it for me. And like, you can call it individualism or whatever, but um, yeah, I wanted my child to have, her father around, and I didn't want him to fight in a war. I didn't want him to die in a war. I didn't want him to be gone. Like, it was so many unknowns. And honestly, after all of this, if he had wanted to do that and he had told me that up front, and I had, chosen to have my daughter, that would have been fine. Like, he wouldn't have been part of my life. He wouldn't have been part of my child's life. I would have barely known him. He would have been a guy that I slept with for 2 weeks, and we didn't know each other, and he was gone. Like, that was actually fine for me. Um,
It's closure at least.
yeah, it's closure. But instead, he, like, told me how much he loved me, and, like, invested all this time in, like, me getting to know him, and, like, making all of these commitments. And I was just like, you know, that was so unnecessary. Like, especially when I mean, not everyone knows this, but, like, he's met my daughter once. And he actively is fighting to not have to, like, pay child support or be involved in her life. And so I'm just like, if you didn't want to do any of these things, I wasn't making you do any of those things. From the beginning, I said, you can go. And instead, he was like, I want to be around. And that just, like, is it's just confusing. I've spent a lot of time being very confused about his behavior. I'm very confused about, like, well, I didn't like back in 2019, I didn't, I hadn't heard from him really. Like, we would email from time to time, but to be honest, like, I had moved on. Like, I had my daughter. I was, like, figuring out how to just, like, be a single mom. And I would hear from him, but anytime I heard from him, it was usually him kind of doing a, like, woe is me, like, being in a war is hard, which I'm like, yeah, it's a war. Like, I don't understand why this is so hard for you to understand. So he would reach out, and then I would tell him, how hard a time I was having. And he never really responded to those as, like, with, like, oh, I'm just, like, sometimes you're telling someone a thing about how hard your life is, and you're not really saying, like, offer me solutions. You just want to have a space to just say, being a single mom is hard.
Yeah.
And his response to that was just, well, you should move to Syria. Anytime I like brought it up, he was just like, oh, I'm not surprised that like all of the Boston activists have just kind of abandoned you or are not really helping you with like all these things like they committed to. Those people really suck. And we're not going to even get into that. He's like saying that these people suck for not helping when he's not helping, but whatever. And, I remember, so this was like a little bit before Christmas 2017. So it was my daughter's first Christmas. And I had been on state assistance for most of the year. So, you want to make your kid's first Christmas like really awesome.
Sure.
And I just didn't have the money. Like my rent was like $600. I got like $500 in cash assistance. So I was always in the hole. And so like Boston, like leftists were always like, funding me, or I was borrowing money from people, or like, I was working like random jobs, like helping organizations with social media, any which way I could like get money.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was home with my daughter still because she wasn't old enough. And I went back to work sooner than I really would have wanted to, because like you just relying on people to, I mean, like Boston is not a place, even though lots of folks have money, the activist scene is very much like poor college students. So it's like, I'm not going to take money from people who barely have it themselves. So like, that was really my only option. But anyway, I was emailing him about Christmas, and he was like, saying that he was going to send money. And it was, I think, the second time by then that he had promised to send money. And, I gave him my PayPal information. He never sent me money. It never happened like that. I got pretty close with his brother. He would come and visit, like not often, like probably like once every 2 months, because he lived in Boston. So he would just kind of come through like after work and like, hang out with his niece, and we would talk. One week in particular, I was having a really tough time with all this lead up to Christmas. And I said to his brother, I was just like, like when I talk to Chris, the only thing, like, I just wish that he would tell me that he thinks I'm doing a good job. Like, I just want to hear that, like, he knows that I'm doing everything I can to be a good mom for our daughter, and that he like respects me in any way for doing all of this work. Cause like I'm hustling, And his brother was like, yeah, I'm sure he appreciates it. I'm sure he knows like how hard you're like working, and like how hard you're like that you're doing all of this stuff. And then like a week later, I got an email from Chris, and it was basically just verbatim, like, I want you to know that you are a good mom and you're doing a good job. It was like his brother had just reported.
Right, right. This.
And then he had just said, yeah, she wants to hear that, so I'm just gonna say the thing that she wants to hear. It was completely devoid of like any real like feeling or consideration on my end. And yeah, he never sent the money for Christmas. I bought all these gifts for my daughter, and he didn't reimburse me. So then I ended up further in the hole. And so I had to like go to, the community, and I was just like, yeah, so I bought this stuff. And, people like, it's fair. They were like, why did you buy all this like stuff for your daughter's like first, like they were like understanding, but they were like, how did this happen? I was just like, well, Chris promised that he would send money. And then, one of my friends was just like, well, hasn't he said that before? And like, he didn't do it. So kind of like, what were you thinking? And I was just like, I really don't know what I was thinking, but that was the last time, that I trusted him to follow through. Like, I was just like, and, we emailed, but honestly, I just like, that moment for me was, I was like, he's never going to come through for this kid. He's like, if he can't do Christmas, like, then this dude like just can't do it. And like, I could spend my whole life like nagging and pushing and like trying to get him to do, right, as I call it. But like all of that work to try to tell a grown ass man what to do just isn't worth it. And so once I stopped just like believing that, you know, he was going to be a good dad, it really opened up my life for a lot more. You know, I realized like that I had a community that took care of my daughter and that they did genuinely care for her, and that I did have a support system, and that like he wasn't part of it, and that's okay, because that's families look all different kinds of ways. Um, and you know, like, but then all of that really changed when in November 2018, yeah, like November 2018, um, you know, he got in touch and was like, "Oh, actually, I've been in the United States this whole time." That's actually
Oh, so let's pause there for a second. So you had said a while back the phrase "he could have just been honest with me." I mean, and you were talking about how, you know, it was occurring to you from watching this, the bailing on Christmas, et cetera, not following through with sending money. Basically, his brother, you know, your daughter's uncle, is, you know, far more present for what it's worth
yeah,
than he is. So, I mean, as far as being a good dad, there seems to be just a problem with like base level honesty. So you talked about how uh, his brother had kind of been around somewhat and had been there as like a little bit of a support or a presence in your daughter's life. Tell me about the rest of his family at this point, because you had had some interactions, and what was their reaction to all of this?
yeah. So after the when I was, I'll back it up a little bit. So when I was still pregnant, when he told me he was going to Syria, um, I ended up leaving early. I was supposed to be there, you know, for Christmas, and I just like pretty much what happened was he told me that in front of his mom. Um, his dad, I think his dad came home, but by then like I had gone to this like their guest room, and I was just like, I'm out of it. I don't want to interact with this guy anymore. Like, I need to figure out like what I'm gonna do. So I guess he told his dad. They had some sort of conversation, and then like the next, I can't remember if it was that night that I like spoke with his dad. It might have been that night. But he anyway, regardless, he didn't change his mind. The next day, um, his mom was like trying to finish up, you know, like Christmas preparations. So she needed to leave. And so it was just me and him. His dad was already at work. And she was like, it was kind of funny. She was like, "Are you two kids going to be okay all by yourselves?" And I was
Wow.
like, "Kids." I was like, "We're like 30 and one of us is pregnant. Like, kids is weird, but okay." And I was just like, and he was like sitting at the table, like clack, clack, clacking on the computer. He was completely ignoring me because, you know, I had basically said, like, I don't support you going to Syria. And like, you know, so he was mad. And I was mad, but I was just like, I was reading a book, like trying to chill, whatever. The second his mom like pulls out of the driveway, he just like looks up from his computer as if as if I had not existed until she pulled out of the driveway. And he looked up like, "Oh, you're here." Like, and basically I'll just say like he started it up. Like he started up like arguing with me about his going to Syria. And I was just like, I'm I'm not happy. Like I don't really want to talk to you about this, you know? And we argued. We got into a huge fight. Um and that fight, it was just like awful. Like at one point, you know, he said to me that when he finished in Syria, he was going to come back to the states, and that he didn't even want his daughter to be raised in the United Snakes of America, and that he was going to fight me for custody, and that because you know he's so well educated, um, that you know he would win, and you know that angered me because he was talking about a baby that was still in my body. So I was just like, you're not doing anything with her. You can't just take her from me. And he was just like, I'll take her from you. Like, that's fine. That's no problem for me if you're going to be like this, you know?
So, and I think worth mentioning here for the audience, clearly paternity was not contested at this point.
No, it was not.
Because I've seen a lot of that from commenters like, how do we even know what's happening? Well, this is how we
Yeah,
know it's.
it's really wild. Yeah, never did he. To me, in our like personal conversations, immediately, even when I told him I was pregnant, you know, he was like, "That's my kid." It only really, actually, let me finish this. So basically, we had this huge fight. I was honestly really scared because I was home alone with him. I didn't know how long his mom was going to be gone, and he was doing the thing that I had noticed from like an earlier interaction with the whole DVD, like that he had gone cold. And I was just like, I don't know what this means, but it seems really bad. Like anytime, I describe it as and this is like weird, but like in Harry Potter, they have Dementors. It was like a Dementor had just like sucked all of the joy out of this person. And I was just like looking at like a very like evil, I don't know, like husk of a human being. So I like ran to get away from him. He was like blocking me for a while from going to like my guest room because I like didn't want to fight with him. I was like, I'm upset. I'm pregnant. I'm upset. Like I just want to like go and be by myself. And at one point he sat down. Like he was like, you know, intimidating me really close. And I thought he was going to maybe like hit me. His family has like an unfinished basement and there were stairs right where I was. And I was like, is this man going to push me down the stairs? Like, oh my God, I've like pissed off this like, you know, fairly well to do like white man and he is going to just like wreck me and they're never going to find my body. Like, it's never going to happen. But he sat down and then I just like booked it to the guest room and I locked the door. And I was like texting my friends. I was like, you have to come and get me. I was like, it was like snowing, you know, and I was just like, I'm so sorry. I messed up. I was just like, this is typical for me. I'm just making dumb mistakes over and over again. And like, I'm so sorry, but like, y'all are going to need to figure out how to come get me from like this weird, like, um, you know, like suburb. So they like hopped in a car. They were like, we're on our way. We're going to come get you. They were like, you just need to like stay fine until we arrive. And I was like, okay. He sat down in front of the door to my room. Like he tried the door, you know, like I could hear him like jiggling and it was locked, duh. Um, and then he sat down with his laptop, you know, I could see the shadow. And then he played videos, I guess videos, audio of like people firing weapons.
What?
Yeah, like gunshots, like directly outside my door. And so I was like, well, this is a real bad situation I've gotten myself into, you know.
Yeah, and worth mentioning here, so this is somebody who had been in the US military for how long?
Yeah, you know, I actually have no idea how long he had been. You know, he told me he was a paratrooper, and that he had done that, I guess, at least once. I don't know how deployments work, but you know,
I
um,
believe he said in another interview that he hadn't deployed, but your guess is as good as mine.
and I have no idea because he told me that he had been a paratrooper. In fact, I assumed for a long time that the reason that he sat down was he always said he had like problems with his knees because he had been in the military and because he had been a paratrooper like it was really hard on his knees. So I assumed that that was why, you know, I had even gotten out of that situation. So hearing that he didn't actually do that is like baffling to me.
Well, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, that's the thing, you know, it's like what I always say is like, I don't know, but he definitely knows. And if he's not like supplying us with any information to know things, like all we have is all these weird things that we've heard that like no one can confirm. And that's really weird. Um, but yeah, I didn't know if he had weapons in the house. That was the thing. I was like, I don't know if he owns firearms. I don't know anything about this person, but what I do know is that this person is doing something that I find very like intimidating and scary right outside my door.
Well, and just to refresh, this is in the same visit to this house where the sort of gathering up of the phones and remotes and putting them in another room and that's not exactly like, I mean, that, you know, that's somewhat disturbing, arguably, or it's very unusual behavior.
Like the phones I get, but I was like the remotes. I was like remotes are like really simple. Like if you open them, like I was like, how could a remote be bugged? Oh, and this is kind of funny. His parents, their Wi-Fi is an open network. They don't even have a password on it.
Okay. So it's sort of selective paranoia.
Yeah. Because I was just like, wait, I was like, why would they like sneak into your house to like bug the remotes, but like you have an open Wi-Fi network? Like, because I
But
asked for
yeah,
the
it sounds irrational.
on. Like I was like, that's weird. Um, so yeah, so basically like his mom came home, they had a conversation in Greek. I don't know Greek, but it was tense. You know, I could tell that she was like, well, she asked, she was like, oh, where's Zipporah? And he was like, oh, she's in the room. And she was just like, you know,
Yeah.
she's tiptoeing, right? Like she was just like, what's going on? And he was just like, well, Zipporah's really upset. And so she's in the room until she's not upset anymore, was how he said it.
Okay.
And then they started their like tense conversation in Greek. And I don't know how long it was until my friend showed up, but they came. They basically like they rang the bell and like she opened the door and they just like barged in and they
Yeah.
were we're here for her. Like we don't know what's going on here, but like we're here to get her. So I like, ran to meet them and it was kind of sad. Like his mom's really nice and he like went to another room, when they showed up and I gave them my bags and I, said to her like, okay, like I'm leaving. And she just like walks to the other room where he is and she's just like, son, like, the mother of your child is leaving. And he's just like, yeah. And she's just like, do you have anything that you want to say to her? And he like walks just in view, to just say like in my general direction, like, no, I don't have anything in particular to say. And and I just left. So right after that, actually probably like in the same time period, all of the Boston, like organizing scene, all the people he was friends with were alerted that like some shit had happened. They were still trying to figure out what had happened. They were like, all we know is that we picked up, this pregnant woman from his house and she's crying and she's real upset. And so everyone was texting to figure out how to get together an accountability process because, I told them, I was like, well, he's leaving. And like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do because I'm pregnant. And so, like, everyone, like, how I understand it, though I don't know if this is actually correct, is that his dad came home, was livid that this had happened. And I assume that the same familial patterns that existed in his family came out that night because
Well,
Chris.
and to tell the audience about that because you told me that Chris had told you he did not have a good relationship with his father.
Yeah, that's just like, yeah, he describes his father as being really abusive, physically abusive to him. Actually, this is just like verifiable. If you were to search his dad's name, you would find police records of the many times that they came to his house when he was growing up. So,
And along those lines, also, Chris has made a big deal publicly in connection both with his activism from sources in the Boston IWW I talked to who had had conversations with him, as well as in his congressional run about like his sort of family's history of like radicalism and communism. Was that something that you saw?
no, they seemed like really, I was kind of shocked at how normal they were. Um, But actually, he once sent me an email like when I was first talking about, like staying here instead of going home to my family. He was like, my family is really, really boring and like drama free. He described them as being really simple people. And he didn't mean it in, any sort of like disparaging way. He was just like, they're total.
Straightforward.
I thought that that was in conflict with, he had told me pretty immediately that like he had, a bad life with his father growing up. So when he kind of was like, actually, my family's totally fine and normal, I was like, that's weird, but like everyone processes trauma in different ways. And like, maybe they are close despite like that this seems really unresolved, but like, whatever, I don't really need to, like, I don't know. But yeah, like actually in the conversation that I had when like, his mom told his dad, that he was leaving to go to Syria. And so like actually, it must have been that same night, like the same night that I arrived, because his dad was really tired. His dad he worked for UPS. He was like, I assume, like a package guy. Um, and so it was a holiday, so he was working overtime. And I remember this, like, he was, he was working overtime because they needed to buy a new boiler for their house. And so like, he was just trying to get as much money as he could because it was an what is that called, like a unexpected expense. And Chris's mom was telling me about it, and I felt bad because she was just like, yeah, we've got this unexpected expense, and like all these other things that are expensive, and she was talking about the baby. And so like I felt really bad that like I felt like I was putting them in a position because like, as much as I have to like constantly unpack it, like, I was the one that was pregnant, right? I was the one who like had done this thing. So I felt bad for them because like they were having to, and it was also like they found out late, right? Like they didn't find out until I was like 6 months pregnant that, they had a grandkid coming. So they were like scrambling to like figure things out financially. Um, but to that, no, I didn't read. I read them as very boring, like in a nice way. Like they were really nice. Like his mom is really involved in like Greek cultural like stuff, and but I didn't read her as like politically anything. In fact, when we sat down with his dad, and I assume in his family, like his dad, like sets the record straight, like, listen here, son. That was very much a conversation. It was like, listen here, you kids. And his dad was just like, we'll help you get an apartment. And like, the two of you need to get married, um, get an apartment, and, you need to start working. They were just like telling him, like, they were, laying down the law. They were like, this is enough. You need to work because you have a baby now, and like whatever you think that you're doing going all of these different places, that's over because this woman here is pregnant, so you have to like do stuff. Sorry. And he was like arguing with his dad about like um like, but you like once were political, and you once like served in this thing, and like you like I just want to. And honestly, like it was hard in a way to watch because the way that I read it was like that he was really trying to like you know follow somewhat like in his dad's footsteps, right? And his dad was just like, yeah, I did those things, and like you know, that was a time that was over, and it was before, I had children. He was like, but now that you're going to be someone's father, like this is what's expected of you. And he was just like, you need to, like find your own American dream. So, I was kind of like, well, yeah, that makes sense because that sounds like something my parents would say. And, like,
Yeah, this was underneath the picture of Stalin that was hanging on the wall over the kitchen table.
yeah, I saw no pictures of Stalin hanging from the wall. I saw a framed map of Greece that was really nice. But and I'll tell you why I looked at all the framed pictures they had. They had a really nice framed picture of like him and his brother from when they were like 8 or something. It's cute with their like backs together. Um, is that they had those like really ornate like gilded frames that for folks who know Greek people know that they love the like like I like ornate frames too. It's not like a drag. I love like gold gilded shit. um and I saw no pictures of Stalin. If someone could tell me where I would have seen it, because I definitely looked in all of the rooms. I be happy to correct that. But I saw no pictures. His parents didn't say anything political at all. He's never even like described his parents as political to me, though. And another conversation that they had actually was, I thought, not very, like communist. It was like when they were talking about expenses, one of the things that they said, it was like his mom was talking to him about their family in Greece. And Chris was saying that he had just seen them, right? I assume that he went to visit the family home before he came back. And like that one of his cousins was complaining to him about repairing, they refer to it as like a moped or like a motorbike of some kind. And so I was asking about it just because, I was like, oh, a motorcycle? Like, that's kind of weird. And so they were explaining that, like, the cousin uses the motorcycle to run errands for the family and that it had broken. And so the cousin had asked Chris for money, and Chris was annoyed that they had had this interaction. So he was telling his mom about it, and she was just like, she was kind of like, yeah, they're always like trying to get money from us because they think because we live in America, we have so much money. But like, we have given them like what we think is appropriate. And so like if the motorbike is broken, then like there's not really anything that we can do about that. Now, is there? And this, I mean, like she wasn't, and that's the thing, is like I would hate to say that that's mean. I don't think that that's mean at all, but that's like a very normal like immigrant experience, I think. Um, but that seems very out of line with this like whole new, like my family has always been communist thing, because I just feel like her analysis would have been really different. And I think that if they were, political in any way, I mean, like that's the thing too. It's like, if you're a communist, then why did you even immigrate to the United States in the first place? And like, his dad did not hesitate to use the term American dream. Like, and he was arguing with him about that, like literally like arguing with him at the table about like, well, that's not real. And like his dad was like, well, how can you tell me that that's not real? Because like they own property. Like, he was like, I work my job. And that was the thing. He was like, I work my job. I'm working these extra hours so that I can make things happen. Like, so I can give you kids everything. That's why I came to this country. And so like the idea that like these people are really like have always been really political. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
abolish
stop there.
private property. Yeah,
That's not true. That's not true.
yeah.
Straight up.
Okay.
I'm and like, yeah, it's just not true. I met them
So
and they,
did I
sorry.
mean,
I
oh
should,
no, that's okay. Sorry, I thought you were done.
yeah, I'm so sorry. They never helped. Even after he left, like I emailed with them and I like really tried with his mom, like, and it was as if when he left, like that I didn't exist. And that was really hard because, like I was supposed to rely on them for help. And
Mhm.
when he was gone, like they didn't offer to, and it was like over the past couple of months, his mom had actually been texting with me. She had been like asking, like, oh, how's your pregnancy going? Are you eating these foods? Are you doing these things? And all of that ended. I received money intermittently from his brother because he and I like still kind of kept in touch. He like, he'd show up and like he like took us to the aquarium and things like that. And he gave us money a few times. But yeah, they were not present ever. They knew that I was struggling. Like they knew. And like they never, the line. So once actually I invited his family. I graduated from a tech program and I did it all like while my daughter was still, I mean, this was like 2017. So yeah, I graduated right before her second. Ooh, I can't remember. But anyway, it was like the graduation was like 2 days before her birthday. And I invited them and I was like, hey, look, like I know you don't really want to see me all the time or anything like that, but like it would be really nice if you wanted to come to this event, like you can come. And basically what his mom like said to me was that they just like weren't comfortable until Chris and I worked things out with like getting to know me.
But yet they know that their granddaughter is out there unsupported.
Yeah. Yeah, they were fine with that. I invited them to her first birthday. Later I'd find out that Chris was actually back from Syria in the country. But he did not have a spare minute to come to her first birthday. He sent his brother. He came with two giant bags filled with gifts. And it was really nice of them, but I would have liked for them to have made an effort to actually like be present, like, and that was the one time I got a card from his grandfather. His grandfather has since passed, so I never had an opportunity to introduce him to his, great grandchild, whatever. And um, he he sent a really nice card, saying, that he hoped to get to meet me and my daughter someday. And he sent me $100, and that is significant to me because it was the first time that anyone in that family had just given me money. Like hadn't just sent a thing that they thought that I needed. That he was just like, clearly she needs money. Like this old Greek man is like, I'm just gonna send her money. Clearly she needs money. And like, yeah, I remember. Um, and yeah, his brother came. We had a good time, but now that time is really tarnished for me because I know that Chris was here. And when I asked him why he didn't come to her first birthday, via text, I was just like, you were here and you could have been there. He was just like, oh, I didn't want, I thought that you would be mad. And if you were going to be mad, then like it wouldn't have been a pleasant, situation for me. And it was like he made it all my fault that he didn't come. Um, but
Whereas, I mean, so between the gap there where you're at his family's house out in Worcester, and you have this pretty horrible experience where you're kind of concerned. Your friends come and pick you up. That is like Thanksgiving time, 2016. You had that experience at their family's house. Chris does follow through and goes to fight with the YPG, leaving you there.
yeah,
Isn't there at Christmas? So he comes back to the US at some point in 2018, and also at some point in this process, um, you started kind of trying to find out a little bit more about him, and because he was pretty well known in the activist world, and you felt like the accountability wasn't there, and it was like, why is this guy just floating around the activist world? When did you start, as we go into 2018, your daughter's there, Chris is not.
yeah.
Um, what happened then?
So really sort of what happened was, so when I left his family home, he, left, and we were trying to get him for this accountability process, hoping to try to, like convince him not to leave for Syria or to at least have him delay. Because what came out of that was that he started telling people that it wasn't his child.
Oh boy.
He told like some of the people from the faction war, that Max person, like, oh, I think that that baby is this other guy's. Like, how can we, kind of the like, how can we really trust her because you don't know her, you know me though, I'm trustworthy. And so like people very quickly, kind of like they were trying to do the accountability process, but honestly, it felt like their hearts weren't really in it because they didn't know me well. Like, I mean, to be honest, from like it makes sense from their perspective because I was like new in town. I just appeared suddenly, said that their friend had gotten me pregnant, said that their friend had been, abusive in some way. And yeah, like he wants to go. And then also, like, we're talking about anarchists. So the idea that he wanted to go fight in the YPG, they were like, well, that's cool. So though we had like this accountability like group together, um, I'll never forget that like they were like, well, what do you want us to do? And I was like, well, I want you to, just like take his passports, like just like stop him from leaving for a minute so we can like figure out what needs to happen. Cause like, clearly some conversations need to happen. We need to figure it out. And one like actually still pretty well respected member of like the anarchist community here was like, well, we're not going to take his passports because that would be a violation of his, autonomy. And I was just like, sorry. Yeah, so I was just looking at this person and, kind of like most things up until pretty recently, I was just like, this doesn't seem right. Like I was just like, what about my autonomy and that like I'm like didn't want to be pregnant and like I didn't want any of these things that are currently happening and so they just sort of like at one point he was supposed to give a talk with an organization called like Boston Friends of Rojava in Syria. I think it was called something else at the time, with a good buddy of his, organizer with Black Rose. And, they canceled him speaking because like, oh, you need to do an accountability process. So you can't like speak. But they still let him attend the event. And so he went to the event. We couldn't find him. That was another thing too. Like we were trying to figure out where he was so that we could get people to talk to him about engaging in this accountability process. And he was just like not returning texts or like, we had no idea where he was, but it was pretty clear that he was somewhere in Boston. Like someone knew where he was. Someone was keeping them at their house. Like where else was he? So he showed up to this event. And even though he was like not supposed to speak, they let him anyway. So yeah, all that happened. The accountability process didn't happen. And after that, I didn't talk to him. Like we had exchanged some really tense emails around that time, especially when he got kicked out of because he got kicked out of his family home. Like his dad came home, found out that I had left and got mad and told him to leave. So he blamed that on me. And then, yeah, at some point he left to go to Rojava and I wasn't in contact with him. I was just basically like, well, fine, this guy's gone and fucked me over like a whole lot. So the thing that I remember doing is that I went back to work. I had like quit my job and I had to call and beg to have my job back just so I could work for like 2 more months. I worked until I was 39 weeks pregnant. And yeah, I had my daughter in end of February and I just, like I had that thought. I was like, I should email him. I should tell him that I've, had our daughter. But at the same time, I was going through a lot of my housing situation wasn't stable and our landlord had decided not to renew the lease. So I was like freaking out about like where I was going to live and like all of those other things. And honestly, I just like didn't want to tell him anything. I was like, he knew when my due date was. And, by then it was like March. So I was just like, he knows that I've had a baby. So like, if he wants to email me, he can email me and ask questions, but like, I should not email him. And of course I caved. I emailed him. And he acted as if nothing was really wrong. He was just like, oh, that's lovely news. And like, I still gave our daughter the middle name that he picked out. Like I really tried to like make an effort. So, and that's where we were. Like for a really long time, we emailed. Like very seldom, I would say like probably once every 2 to 3 months. Like usually I'd initiate. Like I would send an email and be like, oh, she's learning to crawl or like something like that. And he would be like, that's great. And he would tell me a little bit about what was going on in Syria. And, I'd respond, but usually like we just stopped talking to each other because there like wasn't anything, but it was like he was kind of kicking the can down the road is how I describe it. Like sometimes we get close to talking about that, like he had done me wrong, and he would just kind of be like, I know that like things are not great between us. And like, I want to work things out for the good of our daughter. And like, I want to, like, I know we have so much that we need to talk about and like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm committed to figuring things out with you. And he would often talk about a relationship. And, by that point, like, it was really confusing because, he's the father of my child. I never really imagined myself having a kid with someone who I was not partnered to. But I couldn't really see myself with him, but I also couldn't see myself surviving without him because, like, kids need stuff. And I didn't think that I could be a single mom, like I was, and it's kind of silly because I was actively doing it, right? And at the same time, I was telling myself that there was no way I could survive. So if this man's trying to be in my life and trying to be partner to me, then I should be thankful, right? So like, I was like, okay, yeah, we'll figure it out. Um, and
Even if it's far short of what you had hoped for.
yeah, for sure, and
And
I
how are you feeling day to day at this time, just emotionally? I mean, juggling, work and financial concerns with this. What were you feeling day to day?
I think I I I think people thought I was doing really well. Like I had made this choice to have a baby in a circumstance when most folks would have just had the abortion. And I think that I was really confusing to most people I knew, because not only had there had also been this tumultuous thing. And, I'll note here that, like, Chris, when he told people that, like, the baby wasn't his, he had tried to, I'm going to say it like this, even though it's terrible, like, pin it on this other Black organizer who was part of the faction split with the IWW.
Oh,
Actually,
so there was a specific person.
it was a specific person, a really dark skinned Haitian man. And so when my daughter was born, she was really white. She was really pale.
Yeah, so that didn't,
Well, people started talking again.
yeah.
And they were like, and basically for the past few years, random people have come out of the woodwork to be like, I am so sorry. And what they're really apologizing for is that failed accountability process because they believed him.
Yeah.
Like, it made sense that they believed him, but it wasn't until my daughter was born and she looked not like this other guy, that people were like, this child is definitely Christopher's. And then also when I emailed him, like, I showed them emails and I showed them conversations we had had. And then it was like, okay, so clearly this person lied to us. But by then, it's like,
Well, the
this,
damage is done at that point.
yeah, the damage had been done. They couldn't not, like, they couldn't make him come back. They couldn't change what they had done. And we're also talking about a group of people who, like, like, I'll say to their credit, they raised $5,000 for me so that I could get stable housing. But once they did that, and I was all the way, like, I was in another part of Boston, it was as if I dropped off the face of the planet. And, like, people asked about me every once in a while. We stayed friends on Facebook. But as far as, like, supporting me through any of that, that really ended. And I was really upset, because the only people I knew really were these folks who had let me down in a really big way. But at the same time, like, I had lived with them, like, when I was pregnant, when my daughter was really small, some of them. And so honestly, the entire thing has been extremely overwhelming because they love my daughter so much. And even now, I don't know how to talk to them about, like, how upset I still am that.
Yeah, because in a situation like that, no matter whether it gets addressed later on, you still lived through those months or that year of experiencing that treatment.
Yeah, and I want to be really honest, like, it's not that they're bad people, but the thing is that they were misled and that they were lied to, and they believed their friend more than they operated on the values that they claim to hold. Um and and that's kind of part of why I think, some of the stuff that, Chris is saying about like, this is all because, I left the anarchist scene. Like, one, if anyone asked me, they would see that like, this has been going on long before he suddenly decided he was an ML. Like, this has been a chronic problem. And what I personally don't like is that it puts me in a position as if like I and these anarchists are friends and are like working towards something, to like some campaign to like ruin him or whatever. Like, I don't I don't trust those people anymore. Like, like I said, they're adept organizers. Like, I don't wish them any ill will, but I am still really upset with them. And now that I've said this and this is recorded and it's in a video, um, it's like I know that part of community accountability is that even if Chris isn't present, we could still have a process where we all talked about what happened. But I over the past few years, people have come to me and have apologized to me, right? Some of those people, for example, the person Max, they have said that they will write me a letter, and that, they'll write my daughter a letter to explain how sorry they are. And I've never received a letter. I've never really received like an apology that I felt was centering me and how hurtful they have been. But rather, every apology I get is really like them trying to figure out their guilt, because they know that they didn't do things right. So really, this entire situation for me, like this new, like, because Chris has run for Congress, and now I'm back here. To me, this is just a replay of everything that happened in especially like 2018. It's everyone trying to figure out what happened, um, not because they're going to do anything to solve it, but because they want to absolve themselves of blame and of accountability. And so, honestly, you asked me at the beginning of this, like, what was 2018 like? I couldn't tell you what 2018 was like, because I don't think I would describe what I was doing as disassociating. I don't think that I was really there, because I think the way that I coped with it was that I just shoved every feeling that I had that was too complicated, like, deep down into my body, and I just refused to grapple with it. And yeah, that was how I survived. And I mean, like, that's just how you do being a person. Like, bad stuff happens to you, and a lot of the time people are not accountable for it. And so you can either give up. Like, I could have, like, at one point I thought about giving my daughter up for adoption, and I met with an adoption counselor. And I knew that if I gave her up, I would not be here, like that I would, do something reckless with my life. And I decided that I really wanted to be a mom and that I wanted to be with my daughter. So I made different choices. But one of those choices was just like, I got really caught up into like, how do I survive? How do I pay my rent every month? How do I, like, teach my daughter how to crawl? It's like, you're always like caught up. You can always distract yourself from anything that happens to you by focusing on all the things that you need to do
to survive, to just
yeah.
get from day to day.
Yeah, so I survived the day to day. And yeah, these past few months have been really strange for me, because I'm now in a position where I don't have to do that. I am a stay-at-home mom. And my partner works a job where I don't have to work, and I don't have to hustle, and I don't have to raise funds like every month. And something that came out of that was that I actually had to sit and think about the past few years. And when I started doing that work of unpacking what had happened, now I can't, like when I think about 2018, when I think about the past few years, I feel like I just like time skipped. Like I wasn't alive. I wasn't doing things. Even though I was, if you asked anyone in the scene, they would be like, Zipporah was here. She was organizing this thing with us. She helped with this accountability process and she moderated this space. And she like people would tell you that I was there, but I wasn't there. I was so caught up in my bullshit. And anytime Chris emailed, it was like I would get roped back into whatever. Um, he emailed me. He would email me like he was not here. I guess just from having like put stuff together that he came back into the country in September 2018. Wait, 2017. Um, because he like sent an email saying that he had like left the region but that he was in hiding and that he couldn't tell me where he was. That was like always a thing. He was like, I can't tell you. And then he said to me that he was returning to Syria. So he made it like, I'm not there right now, but I'm going back. And I was just kind of like, okay, like this guy's going all over the place. At one point he emailed me, he was like, I'm in Cuba, like, and so I was really shocked when he emailed me in November of 2018 and was like, he didn't actually phrase it like, oh, I've been here the whole time. He just was like, I'm in Vermont and I'm having a baby with this other person. And then from there, I had never looked for him. Like he had said, like, don't talk about me on social media. Like, I'm involved. The government's trying to get me, all of that stuff.
Which is pretty much still the line up through today with PCUSA, the secrecy, the state is out to get them, OPSEC, etc.
Yeah, I think that there's, some an organizer taught me this pretty recently, because I'm in an org where we do talk a lot about OPSEC. They were
It's
like,
important. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, for
like,
sure.
there's a difference between
A
OPSEC
rational
secrecy
OPSEC.
and like the thing is like Chris is like, oh, I was hiding my whereabouts because the government, but from that DHS document that we've all seen, the government's aware of when he's going in and out of the country on a plane. So there's like this whole idea that any of that has to do with him hiding from the government. Another thing was that he, when we went for our paternity test, they like took his ID, and the address on his ID is the address of the farm that he lives on. So like if you're hiding from the government, then like you're doing a really bad job. And and then but actually at that time, he later, him and his new wife, Amanda, they were telling me that he didn't live there when I was trying to serve him with paternity papers. So I don't think this really has anything to do with hiding from the government, because the government is very aware that Christopher exists and where he's going. They are definitely on his shit.
No,
Um,
it sounds a little bit from everything that you've
like I
said.
just like he didn't want to pay child support. This has been the story for the past, year and a half, which is that um he when we went for the paternity test, before that, he was like, I'm gonna give you money, because I didn't want anything to do with him. I just want to say this because like I think it's really important that like people hear this from me. When Chris emailed me in November of 2018, he finally gave me his like WhatsApp and his Signal number, right? We immediately started texting. From the jump, I told him I wanted him to terminate his rights and I did not want anything to do with him. That is verifiable. I have all the text messages. I told him he could get the hell out, because like by that point, I mean, like this dude has lied to me so much, and I just didn't want to put up with it anymore. Like I finally had like a good job. That was the thing. Like I had just started like my career. I was managing being a single mom. I had moved out of a cooperative house. Like into an apartment that I shared with 2 other activists in town, and things were smooth. Like I had figured it out. And then he just like barreled in and was like, "Hey." And I was just like, whatever this dude, anytime this dude is in my life, it's chaos. And so I said, I don't want any more of this. So he said to me, I will do whatever you think is best because I know I have, hurt you and I'm sorry, and also like, I will do whatever you want. So I said, I want you to terminate your rights. And then he argued with me about it. Like,
Except that.
huh?
I said, except that. He'll do anything except that.
So, all of this conversation, like about child support and, oh, isn't it so mean that she's, using the state? I didn't want to do any of this. What Christopher wanted to do was he wanted to pay me money like under the table and randomly. But
With no accountability.
wait, hold on. What did you say?
I said with no accountability, which it sounds to me is kind of the theme here. Like the address, oh, he can't tell you because of the government, this because of the government. It sounds actually like the trend is more he won't do XYZ or pin himself down more because of accountability to you and other activists.
Yes. So, he was saying to me before we went for the paternity test, I have $1,000 I'm going to give you, because I didn't even really want to meet with him for the paternity test. I was like, I don't need a paternity test. Like, I just need you to go. But then at the same time, I hired an attorney and he was like, to do a rights termination, you have to have the paternity test so that they can confirm that this guy is the father before you go through this process. So I was like, okay. So I cooperated. He cooperated. He wanted to do the paternity test. But to get me to even show up, he was like, I'm going to give you $1,000. To which I said, you can PayPal me, right? Like, he was like, no, we need to meet in person. I need to give it to you in person. And I was just like, I don't really want to talk to you or meet with you in person.
Yeah.
So, but this was, who couldn't use an extra $1,000? Like, and that's the thing. It's like, so I met with him. Then, I did need the paternity test. But he like refused to send it virtually. And he said that the reason he couldn't do that was, again, the government. But really, it was because he wanted to have a lure to get me to show up. And I took it because my answer wasn't going to change. But yeah, we went for the paternity test. He gave me an envelope with $1,000. And, he was like, yeah, I don't see any reason why we need to do a rights termination. Like, let's just, like he wanted to keep just giving me money under the table. But the thing is that like I already had a history with him, of the times he promised to send me money and he didn't. And then I also, by that time, found out that he was going to Dartmouth, which is a school that costs $60,000 a year, that, he's having another child and he's flying wherever all over the fucking world. And I was just like, this guy wants to just give me money when he decides that I deserve it, which so I got $1,000 for meeting with him in person, where he proceeded to tell me lies for 2 hours. This guy told me all sorts of things that some of them I knew weren't true the second they exited his mouth. Like, he told me that he had repaid the IWW. I had already emailed the general headquarters of the IWW, and I already knew it wasn't true. But when he said it, I didn't go, that's not true, because I spoke to them. I went, oh, that's all really weird because I haven't heard that you've done that. And then he was like, well, it's happening on an international level. So that's why you don't know, because it's an international arm of the IWW that's talking to the American. I was like, oh, okay. So, and and then, he told me that he was a sperm donor for Amanda. And I had already looked at her social media and I had seen her talking about him. And so I was like, well, that's not true, because she seems to think that you're in a relationship. And he was like, oh, no, we're not together. And I was just like, how are you not together with someone that you live with, who you're having a child with? And he was like, oh, I'll explain it to you. Like, you just don't get it. And I was like, later.
I think actually you get it probably better than anyone else does.
He once sent me a text message referring to himself as a sperm donor, and I screenshotted it and I sent it to her. And she was like, wow, that's really interesting that he would say that. And I was just like, yeah. So somebody doesn't
You
know.
donated it directly to her.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, she had like posted her number on her Facebook page. So I was just like, you can just
Oh
have
my
this.
God.
Because at that time, he was trying to convince me to move to Vermont to live in this woman's home and that he wanted to have another child with me. At the
All right.
same time, he's refusing to like tell me when he's going to pay me money or anything. And I was just like, dude, all of this is really weird. But it was like, for me, anytime, he said, these are the things that I want to do, I always thought about all of the promises and commitments he made when I was pregnant that he didn't follow through on. So I was just like, yeah, I don't believe you. And of course, his response, I straight up said, I don't believe you. And he was just like, I'm gonna, I'm dedicated to spending my life working to convince you, to show you that I'm dedicated to being a father to our child and that I'm going to be here, I'm going to be present, I'm going to, he told me, the ask for the IWW for the accountability process, the now everyone understands the second accountability process, okay? That was because he sent me a series of texts where we agreed that he needed to go through a restorative justice process with me. And he committed to doing that, not just in this text, but also in emails when he was in Syria. Over and over, he said, I believe in restorative justice and I want to go through this process with you. But the second that accountability process ask went around, did he do the accountability process? No. Instead, he answered this ask just for him to sit down. And, the things that I wanted out of it was I still wanted the same thing that I wanted from the beginning. I wanted him to go through the process for a rights termination. That's all I need from him, period. I went down the road of requesting child support because he refused. So I said, okay, if you're going to refuse to terminate your rights, then you need to take care of this child. You're saying to me you want a co-parent. And at one point I said to him, what do you think co-parenting is? And he was like, oh, I figure I would, I tell her about my life and I take her to museums. And I was like, well, that's all fine and good for weekend dad, but I don't need weekend dad. I need 24/7 dad who also is, equally responsible for a child that we both made. So you're not going to come and like blow into town when you so feel like it in between like you're, gallivanting to Venezuela or like whatever to talk at my child about all of the trips you've been on. She's 2, so her interests are really limited. And he like didn't understand why I wanted him. Actually, at one point in April, so this was when his second child was born in Vermont. Um, the black man from the IWW, who he had famously tried to pin our child as being his, got in touch with Christopher. And this guy is a father. And he was like, look, I'm just going to talk to him man to man. And I'm going to explain to him, that he has a responsibility. This man spoke to Christopher for hours, hours. And I thank him for that. This guy is like very like, to him, things are very simple. And I appreciate that because I feel like what really is getting lost in this conversation is that people are like, I'm reading these comments like that one where they're like, well, men are compelled by the state to work. And like, let's all talk theory about what's happening. But This
Look
isn't
at your
a
life.
theoretical situation. It's a very real thing that is happening. And while people are theorizing about whether or not Christopher should have responsibility to take care of the child that he made, this child is very much alive and in need of support. And this is not a theoretical conversation. And this man from the IWW, who once considered Christopher a great friend, he also is a child of immigrants and has a good union job. And despite all of his, because he has, baby mama drama, he said, despite all that, he pays his child support and he picks up hours as a welder as he needs to. He spoke to Christopher, trying to just level with him. And Christopher said to this man, I don't understand why I need to pay child support.
And that was part one of Socialism for All's conversation with Boston activist Zipporah Legarde concerning her relationship with PCUSA congressional candidate in Vermont and Vermont Progressive Party Vershire County Chair Christopher Helali. We offer this interview in the spirit of accountability, which, again, initially was the question: should PCUSA, and for that matter, the Vermont Progressive Party, be involved with an activist who has had this kind of a past in Boston and who other organizations who work in solidarity, the Boston IWW in this case, have specifically asked other organizations not to work with until he undergoes an accountability process, which, as Zipporah made clear, is in fact the second accountability process that has been requested of this individual. Zipporah and I had to end our conversation there due to time constraints. However, we may be putting up another segment of interview with more up-to-date topics. Most of this interview went up to 2018 with a brief discussion of 2019 to the present. And there is active litigation in court today regarding the rights termination that she is requesting. Socialism for All would also like to take this opportunity to remind internet socialists who maybe have come to the movement just in the last few years, say after the Bernie Sanders campaign or the election of Donald Trump, etc., that there is a long history in the real world, real organizations, labor unions, political parties, etc., of people working together face to face, not having online debates about abstract concepts, but actually fighting with their neighbors, with their fellow workers, with their comrades, in solidarity to achieve particular goals pertaining to the interests of the working class. It's not a game, it's a real fight with real consequences, real feelings, and real outcomes. Just because you heard someone say something on an internet program that you agreed with or thought was edgy or whatever, doesn't mean that this is the hill to die on, that this is an organization worth defending. There are a lot of other things to consider in that process. And in fact, if you get involved with an organization, you will find out that organizations on the left have ways of trying to have accountability, to have a security culture that works for them, and to account for people who sometimes abuse those processes. In the next video, we will be addressing some of Chris Helali's responses to this, discussing why, in our opinion, they are inadequate given the facts of the situation, and assessing some of the impact statements from other members of the Boston IWW. The organization to which Chris Helali belongs and ran for Congress now, PCUSA, is gaining a reputation online for being a badass, militant, Marxist-Leninist organization, a mantle that Chris Helali seems more than eager to pick up. Yet, just a couple of years ago, I mean, literally less than 2 years ago, he was still very active with Boston area anarchist groups. And as Zipporah mentioned, whenever this conversion to diehard Marxist-Leninist occurred, it was very recent. People should not be drawn in so easily to these kinds of labels. There are many other ways to evaluate the usefulness of an organization rather than whether it checks your particular pet list of issues that you got out of internet debate culture. Internet debate culture just doesn't go very far in the real world. Actually, it goes almost nowhere. Figuring out the right theoretical positions is one thing, But whether you're able to actually achieve some kind of positive effects for yourself and your community in the real world is what really matters at the end of the day. And overall, what the US left needs to do right now, in my opinion, on this channel, is to form a broad coalition of the Green Party, the PSL, the IWW, the DSA that kind of straddles the line between socialism and social democracy, labor unions, including mainstream labor unions. And we need to do this outside the Democratic Party, and we need to fight for socialism. Even though organizations can retain their particular identities within that coalition as distinct units or individuals, we have to come together and we have to be effective. Typing comments on the internet is not going to cut it. Socialism for All is out here trying to do audiobooks, trying to do interviews, trying to do commentary that is useful to the movement, but we are not an organization. You as a commenter are not an organization. You can't actually do anything as an isolated individual, just talk. At Socialism for All, we try to have directed, constructive talk that can be of some benefit to the movement. But at the end of the day, we need to be accountable to each other and to keep our organizations in line. We hope that this interview has been enlightening for you. And we are going to end the video now with our usual thanking of the patrons whose names are on the screen, and then also with a bonus audio clip. This is a clip from an earlier portion of my same conversation with Zipporah, but before we got into the chronological linear narrative that seemed like the best place to start. However, this clip also seems significant to me, so I'm going to include it in the video, and we'll close with that as a kind of bonus feature. Thanks for listening.
And I see a lot more people joining the movement, which is great. But people have to realize, and hopefully not the hard way, that there are
Yeah,
scumfucks out there, both on the payroll and not, who
right.
just see us as targets.
Yeah, for real. And I think the thing, it's like vulnerable people also have like can do a lot of harm. And I think that's been the thing about it that's been really hard is that like in a lot of my interactions with Chris, he does a really good job, in private of painting himself as like this very like hurt person, like, oh, my family life was really bad, my dad was really abusive, oh, I went through a divorce, my wife lied on me, like, and he just is so sincere. And so like even as he was being actively harmful towards me, I was really afraid to say anything because I knew, like the hurt people thing. And so I was like, I gotta stay by this guy's side and like help him figure it out. Especially because I was pregnant. So I was like, I need this guy to be good. So like he can co-parent with me, whatever that looks like. And then, I mean, obviously with how things have shook out, it like wasn't going to be like that. But I think, like I sacrificed a lot of myself and even, like told myself that it was fine that I was doing it because I was helping him. And, whatever's going on, because I mean, I have theories about what's going on. But it doesn't escape me that, there's definitely something going on with him personally. Um, and, but also we all got lots of stuff going on. Like, I think that was the thing that, I had to like, I sort of had to have a reality check about, which was like, Zipporah, you also have a lot of stuff going on. Your home life also was not super great, but you're not like an abusive person because like you went through it and you were like, I never want someone to experience that. And some people go through it and they're like, I need to maintain a lot of power. And, it's like a way that they protect themselves by being like, I'm never going to be vulnerable ever again. I'm always going to be in power. I'm always going to be in charge. And that way I can avoid anyone hurting me. And sometimes, like I wonder how much of that is actually going on with Chris, because sometimes, like back when he and I used to, communicate, I could see that like raw, pained person. But it's not that I don't think that that person is there, but what I had to like remember was that like regardless of if that person exists, that person is in like he's in a position to hurt a lot of other people. So it's like I can feel bad that that's happening to him personally, but I can't let that be a reason that I condone this continuing on. Especially when, like he has resources to work through whatever is going on. Like he could go to therapy. Therapy's great. Lots of people should go to therapy, like and I don't know. I mean, like, but he doesn't do any of those other things, right? I mean, like actually at one point he told me that he was going to therapy. Like when he got back in touch, I guess it would have been like January 2019. Yeah, like he was like, "Oh, I'm working on myself. I'm going to therapy. I'm meditating." And I just don't think that he's really doing that, because like therapy requires you to like, you have to want to make it, you like do have a commitment to like doing better. And just based on my interactions in the past like year and a half, I'm just like, okay, so this doesn't read to me as someone who is actively engaged in like being accountable and like asking themselves what they can do better, which is what therapy does. So and then I had to realize, I was like, that was also a lie. I was like, so this person is just telling me the things. And that's the thing, is like for someone to tell you what you want to hear, they have to like know that that's the correct thing that they should be doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it can be, I mean, yes, I first of all totally agree. Going to therapy, meditating, being introspective, reflecting on why you do the things that you do, reflecting on your socialization. I mean, you mentioned the thing of like hurt people. Anybody who grows up in in an environment where they're a victim of abuse. I mean, we're all victims of capitalism, broadly speaking,
Right.
which has many different manifestations. But if somebody grows up in, a more intense, domestic, for example, situation that is abusive, I mean, you get socialized into that. It maybe starts surfacing a lot in your youth or teen years, and then in your 20s is when you have to start making decisions like that. As you become an adult, you have to make decisions of like, am I going to get the help? Am I going to make the change? Because we know by default, people just basically, it is kind of monkey see, monkey do for the human nervous
Mhm.
system. Like, all that stuff gets buried in your mind. And if you don't put some conscious work into it, you do wind up acting it out again. Now, it's an easy thing to say, oh, I can change, I'm doing the work. We also know that, I mean, even, on just full benefit of the doubt for anybody who has done that process, it's hard. I mean, and, people can't even start that process. And it's scary. I mean, because you do have to confront, whatever it is that kind of threw you off course and made you a victim. And that can certainly bring up a lot of hard feelings, be a difficult process that people can abandon. Hopefully, they come back to it at some point. But yes, I mean, what you mentioned about, some people taking the strategy of, kind of always being in power, I can control, becoming a kind of control freak, but still being, kind of scared and hurt on the inside, it is a dangerous combination. So, I mean, in this case, you, like you said, you have your sort of thoughts and opinions about what's going on from having known Chris personally. I mean, I would say, off, at face value, like combining a congressional run with, deep introspective work might not be the best combination. I mean, I'm not there
Yeah,
on the ground,
like
but
that to me, was even more of a, like the nail in the coffin of like, okay, this person isn't doing the work. Because like, the thing that the way I feel about it is, so we're in the middle of family court and all this stuff with the restraining orders, and like it's fraught, right? Like I don't think anyone would say that either of us is having a great time. And to decide to run for Congress when, I'm just going to say it like this, like when your shit is fucked up. Like but yeah, when everything is so contentious, um just is baffling, because what would have worked better would have been if Chris had engaged in this accountability process. We could have figured out, um, every like what had happened with the IWW. Like they could have gotten some closure, because, and I think that that's not really part of the conversation, and it should be, which is how hurt people in the Boston IWW were, not just because the money was stolen. I think that we hyper focus on funds were stolen because that's in our minds, because we're so like caught in like the capitalist like construct. We're like, okay, if you take money and you pay it back, then the harm never happened, which is not true. That's just not how that works. And I just will flag that I find it really strange that a bunch of anti-capitalists are so hyper focused on money moving around as a means to repair harm. Um, but also, like, the Boston IWW had to do a lot of work to build affinity and repair the mistrust. Um, and yeah, so like engagement in the accountability process not only would have given me a lot of clarity about a path forward with Christopher, but it also would have really helped the branch just bury, not bury, but like bury is definitely the wrong word.
Put it to rest.
Yeah,
Give some
like put it
peace.
to rest, because like now, I was just talking with one of the leaders of the Boston IWW, a really nice girl. And, the thing that she was saying was just like how frustrating it is for them, because they're having to answer questions about a situation that happened 5 years ago.
Right.
And the thing that I think a lot of people don't get when they're contacting the Boston IWW is that they have Boston's a college town, so they have a lot of turnover. So when you email the Boston IWW to be like, I have questions about this situation that happened 5 years ago, you're talking to people who literally just showed up in Boston like for college like a year ago. And so like they know about it, but they know about it in the same way that any of us know about it, which is that some stuff happened. And they're always like, well, I wasn't there. Um, and so it's like, it's not really, but more importantly, they're actually, the Boston IWW has rebuilt. They're doing a lot of really great work supporting unions here. And so for them to be dragged back into this is messed up, especially when, if Chris had agreed to the accountability process, we could have done that work. We could have written like a statement, a shared understanding, like, and these are ways that, Chris is going to be accountable for this, like he's going to repay the money. And also like, but outside of that, it's like, I don't see where Chris has learned, like that was like what he was involved in was bad. And
No, in fact, I mean, the thing that I keep getting referred to the most is his interview on Bay Area 451, in which he more or less, I mean, dismissed everyone accusing him of just kind of like being jealous because he's such a cool guy and he's not an anarchist anymore, and they're sad and they miss him, and he did nothing wrong really. So it's, yeah, certainly I think there's a lot of people who would disagree with that from what
yeah,
I've talked to.
his, yeah, his inability to own his mistakes is, honestly, like the leading reason why I do not want to co-parent with him. Because it's just like, back in back when he and I were still texting, and again, this is like January 2019. That sounds correct. Yeah. Um, he was like, he just said to me like, I've made some mistakes and I'm sorry. And I was just like, well, hey, you're gonna have to be more specific.